Morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. My name's Harriet. I've met quite a lot of you, but not everybody. I'm a member of the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership team. I work at Sheffield Hallam University as a research fellow, and particularly focus on the side of the work where we're supporting places and helping to build capacity and capability for evaluation and learning. We've got some colleagues here today that are also just get to introduce themselves now, and then we'll kind of get into the session and we'll do a bit of an icebreaker. Simon, pass on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. Yeah, Simon Armour. I've met a lot of you before, but hello to everybody, anyone I've not met yet. So yeah, I'm part of the NELP CCA. The NELP team working on CCA, in particular configurational comparative analysis at the Sheffield Hallam. And
thanks, Simon. Emma, we've got today as well in our team. Emma's going to be supporting us through getting everyone in and out of the breakout rooms in a slick manner. Emma, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm sure you've seen me before, so I won't introduce myself again, but nice to see you.
Thank you, Emma. We do have one other member of the NELP team. I think it's just one other. I'm scrolling through. We've got Amy here today, but Amy is kind of here just attending and will probably be in a breakout room. Amy, do you want to give a quick hello, quick wave?
Hi, everyone. Amy, work for the NELP team. Just get to watch and listen to you all today. So yeah, I see you all. I think Louis is here on the call as well. I think I spotted him.
Yes, I'm just
on page 3.
looking for him. I can't see him. I've got 3 pages of people. So yeah, Louis, please go for it. Introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Louis, part of the NELP team, so working across the CCA work, things like today, as well as a lot of the NELP work with the cohorts and the evaluation and learning work, so great to be here.
Fantastic, thanks Louis, and I definitely didn't forget you there. I was just, couldn't see you. Okay, so yeah, we just want to thank everyone firstly for not only, Simon.
I was just going to say, I've got Russ Bowler and Ross McGriffin from Stockport who are co-presenting with us today as well. So I don't know if you want to do a quick intro at this point, or
let's do that now. Sorry, let's do that now, please. Ross, and I'm not doing very well as chair, am I?
Don't worry.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. My name's Ross McGuigan. I'm the active communities manager at Life Leisure in Stockport. So just sort of come on board today just to talk about some of the place partnerships work and relating to this sort of conditions. So yeah, nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Ross. And Russ.
Morning, everyone. Russ Bowler, consultant for physical education, sport and physical activity at Stockport Council, based in the public health team. I work across education and public health, and I'm leading on much of this work in Stockport as part of our active communities work.
Thanks, Ross. So yeah, we're going to get going with the session. Firstly, thanks for attending today, and secondly, for those of you who have been involved in the undertaking the survey and the CCA process, and all the follow-up meetings, we want to thank you for your involvement in that. We appreciate, it takes a lot of your time, and we hope it was, an equally valuable process for you as it was for us. So we're going to start by giving you a bit of an overview, and we're going to present the findings from the evaluation and learning report and the system maturity matrix. And that's going to be brought to life by our colleagues from Stockport, Russ and Ross. Please, throughout this, do use the chat function to offer your questions and share your thoughts. The more we can use the chat as well, the more involved everyone can be. We will have a break, and then we'll go later into breakout rooms. There'll be an opportunity there to kind of troubleshoot this with colleagues from across the country. And finally, we'll bring that back together in plenary feedback and talk through the next steps. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've spent just the purpose of today's workshop from our perspective. So we've spent a bit of time as researchers analysing the data from the survey and working with place partners in the sense making workshops. And today we kind of wanted to combine that and share with you some initial findings from the analysis and interpretation, and kind of really encourage you to reflect on how this relates to your experiences of working in this way. Louis, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. So again, thank you to everyone for coming today. For those of you that attended the previous learning seminar, which was last week, if I'm still got my dates right, we looked at community-led initiatives. So hopefully that will still be fairly fresh in your mind. And as we go throughout this session, there might be moments that that overlap and intersect with one another. But for today's workshop, we're going to be focusing on inclusive cultures for physical activity in communities. If you didn't manage to make it to the learning seminar next week, but you'd like to watch the recording, I think it's just still being edited before it's updated and uploaded onto the website. So keep an eye out for that. So inclusive cultures for physical activity in communities. As you see on the slide, in italics, we've got sort of the snapshot descriptor for this subcondition. So there is a culturally inclusive social environment for physical activity which enables people to move more in ways that suit them. Yeah, sorry, that Move More just stands out because I know there's lots of projects, lots of work called Move More, things that just made me have a little smile because I know Sarah's on the call from Wakefield and they've got Move More Wakefield. Apologies for getting distracted there. So this slide itself is summarizing what the embedded level would look like from the maturity matrix. So physical activity is widely valued and increasingly the norm throughout communities in the place. Social environments are culturally inclusive and encourage and facilitate physical activity for everyone. And everyone in the community, including those with experience of barriers to participation, can experience the freedom and confidence to be active in ways that suit them and that they enjoy. And hopefully this is something that resonates with what you would want from an inclusive culture for physical activity within your place, within your communities. Now, this is really difficult to achieve in reality because of the inequalities that are deep-rooted, they're systemic. So it's not surprising that we're not in that position where we've got lots of people or lots of places that are embedded with this. And as we go through the findings, we'll talk about that a bit more. But we need to look at controlling what we can control and making those incremental improvements so that we can reduce those inequalities and work towards a realistic goal with this. So the Active Lives Inequalities metric identifies the key characteristics that are associated with lower levels of physical activity. And one thing to stress is we're looking at those that are more likely to be less active, and those that face multiple inequalities or intersecting inequalities are more likely to be inactive. So this just identifies some of those key groups, key demographics of those individuals that are likely to be inactive. By valuing diversity, working in our equitable partnerships with communities, hopefully we can realise the potential and the resources and the opportunities within those communities to help overcome this and to work towards more inclusive cultures for physical activity. Simon, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. Just in terms of what we're talking about today, we talked a little bit in the last two seminars about the process that we went through in terms of collecting the data. So most of you have probably heard that before, so we're not going to go over that again, but it will be there available on the website for people who may have missed that if you need to catch up on that. So suffice to say, the findings that we're going to share today are based on both the configurational comparative analysis, which is a way of sort of looking for those overall patterns across 47 different places that took part in the configurational comparative analysis. And when we've identified those patterns, we need to sort of look at the individual cases to understand why those patterns might be happening. And so we've also done a lot of work going through the evaluation and learning reports that were submitted in the spring to sort of develop that more in-depth understanding. So we're combining the sort of the big picture with the sort of deep dive here in order to try and understand the whole picture really as to, how and why things might be changing or not changing within different places, which is the whole purpose of trying to do really here. So I'm going to say a little bit about some headline findings for the condition we're focused on today around inclusive cultures within the community. First of all, though, just to talk about the spread of maturity levels for this. So after we've gone through all that process of assessing maturity levels, working with each place on that, this was the final spread of scores. So as you can see, there's nowhere's got to that embedded level, which would be scored 6 or 7. Only 3 have scored 5, so the majority of places have on the lower level of maturity on this, and that's we think because of the challenge of achieving this. In a way, this is an outcome that we're all working towards, isn't it? Actually, if we crack this, we're well on our way to making a big impact on the problem. I wouldn't say solve it. I don't think we'll ever completely resolve this inequality. But the line on there then just shows where we've drawn a line between to separate these, because for this purpose of CCA, you need to sort of divide into 2 groups, and you're comparing the higher and the lower basically, and saying what's the difference. So basically, this dividing it there between 3 and 4 means that we're classing 20 cases as having the outcome present and 27 cases as not. And when we did the analysis using the software, the Eval C3 software, which is available to everybody free if you want to use it, this is the simplified version of what came out of that basically. And the interesting thing here is that this going from sort of left to right across the speedo effect there, we're actually talking the strongest indicator or predictor was community leadership and influence within the work that's taking place. But that needs to be combined with other conditions as well. So the whole thinking here is that it takes multiple different things coming together to achieve the outcomes. And supporting community-led initiatives is what we talked about last week in quite some depth with a presentation from Bradford as well. So that's in that session, we talked about how that relates to the community perspectives and the building capacity and so on as well. So those 3 to the right were kind of all the focus of last webinar that we did. So this time we really want to focus on, okay, so if you've got a lot of that, quite good level of supported community-led initiatives, what then enables us to get to that next step of really seeing that those changes in people's lives on the ground, the sort of real changes that, people are actually engaging in physical activity within their local area and feel that it's something that is for people like us, as we might say, to get involved with. So what we're going to do now is to hand over to Stockport, who are going to talk a little bit about how this relates to their experiences over quite some time now of working very intensively with the communities in their area. So hand over. Is it Russ first or Ross?
It's me, Simon. Thanks, Simon.
Okay.
Although I am going to hand over to Ross fairly quickly because Ross has been leading on this on the ground. But I just wanted to just give some background and some conditions into the development of the conditions in Stockport before I hand over to Ross, who'll take you through some of the what and the how that we've worked through. Just for those of you who don't know where Stockport is, Stockport's one of the 10 local authorities of Greater Manchester, and Greater Manchester was one of the 12 original local pilot or local delivery pilots, as they were called at the time, We very quickly removed the word delivery and just called it local pilot, because it's not about delivering to communities at all, is it? It's about how we support communities to move forward and achieve what they want to achieve with our support. So so Stockport's in Greater Manchester. That started back in, as one of the, as some of you know, as back in 2019. So we've been working at this for a while now, and we certainly haven't cracked it. We have made progress, but there's still a long way to go. So we can share what we've learned so far, but it's important to understand that we haven't learned everything yet. We're still on that journey. And Russell explained some of the things we have learned so far on our way. Next slide, please, Simon. I think one of the things, just to reinforce that point, that struck me when Simon showed that dichotomy slide, the three places that the highest maturity levels were or are, according to that work, are based in those original local pilot areas. So again, I think it reinforces that this takes time, and it's something that progress takes time and isn't going to happen overnight, and does require patience to order to do that. Just on that as well, on this slide, just to recap on what Simon said, that although you've got the scaling on here from less strong to strong, as I understand it, the difference in frequency of these conditions across those more mature areas is minimal. There's not a lot of difference between the less strong and the strong one on the left. And I think that reinforces the point that you shouldn't be looking, or in our experience, we shouldn't be looking to address one of these four or two of these four in isolation. It's very much about how do you address these four together, because they're interrelational and they're interlinked in a way that if you're not addressing all of the four, from our experience, it will impact on that central circle there around inclusive cultures. Next slide, please, Simon. And just before I hand over to Ross, just to share with you that this work, as part of the place partner work, as it's called now, is part of our wider strategic work around supporting residents and communities in Stockport to be more active. And we look at this work as part of our action research strand, our piece of work that is there to form, test and learn, that we then take that learning and we embed it across all of those levels within our wider systems work. So where it's appropriate, this thinking and way of working fits not only just in that community section you can see as third up from the bottom of our onion, as they call it, some people call it an egg. This way of thinking and working actually fits in many of those levels across the wider system. So we're taking this learning and not just developing it within those specific communities, but we're taking it and having conversations and working with organisations around organisational culture and practice as well. But in terms of what we've done and how we've done it in Stockport, I'll hand over to Ross now.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate that. And yeah, just for a bit of context regarding sort of life leisure position. So we're essentially the kind of main leisure operator within Stockport. The team I manage is around sort of projects, physical activity projects and programs, health interventions, etc. So I'm sure very much kind of relates to a lot of people in here. And as part of this work, this was around I think 5 to 6 years ago, we were sort of introduced into this partnership in Stockport, and it was been a very interesting journey to lead to this point and be able to be in this position to hopefully kind of give you a bit of an idea about our progress and where we've come to. But the main sort of reason for being here is hopefully to kind of explain this sort of high maturity in community leadership and influence that seems to kind of facilitate that development of the inclusive cultures for physical activity and community. So hopefully I can give a bit more of a localized kind of view on that in Bridlington. Bridlington, high area of deprivation, one of the highest in the northwest of England. This was essentially, a very kind of apt area to deliver on this work. From my perspective, when I was brought in, I had a knowledge of Bridlington. We delivered some work there. We had quite a new leisure facility there that was about a year old. But I think there is a little bit of a head start in a sense of knowing that we've got the kind of building blocks of building relationships with the community and the relationships we've got with local partners as well. My kind of journey started within that with you know, I was sitting in like community spaces, cafe spaces. I was meeting through those key kind of individuals professionals who worked in that area, and they were a bit of an icebreaker for me to speak to people. Very much went in there with no expectation and no focus on physical activity at all. It was more to explore like the knowledge of local people and community. There's loads of insight and information already there. So it's just trying to reinforce that. And I think what it did reinforce is the strong influence from things like word of mouth and the key community members that very much relate, you know, to this condition around community leadership and influence. That really resonated, that was a strong kind of trait that fed through the area in Brinnington. The place that kind of started, you can see here with the different points around the mats, the walking form and things like that. That was actually very much, we felt like a really sort of strong catalyst for creating like an informal environment for the community to come and feed around things that they wanted to do. I started up this forum there, made it really informal, put some lunch on, made it quite inviting and quite visual. And basically did this brainstorming exercise that kind of gave a bit of a bottomless pot of money, imaginary bottomless pot of money to the community and to key organisations there. And that was really the start of where you can see these work streams. These work streams were kind of purposeful because they were, you know, quite a common theme from what people have suggested. But we wanted to also see what that appetite was to encourage, you know, adapting their ways of working to empower communities as well. That was a really key part of this. Again, we didn't want to be decision makers in this process, so we wanted to create that kind of environment and culture for people to understand, you know, where we could take their ideas forward. So again, I'll try not to keep mentioning the conditions and things, but hopefully you can see this kind of intertwine with a lot of things I'll kind of discuss. I'm going to just give one example in particular. If you just move to the next slide, please. This is around the something called the Brinnington Maps. Now, again, that was an idea from that forum. The process of that was very much that every point of decision making was led by the community. So we had a small task group. We did kind of community sort of engagement type events with like a table and stall, and incentivize that for people to come along and feedback on the maps. But again, physical activity actually really wasn't the forefront of that. That came through within one of the 3 maps that was produced, which was more of a walking map. So it's a pink one you can kind of just see in the picture. Again, the process behind that was kind of, we wanted to work to create those enablers for this work to take place. So that was this approach was a component of that change of creating that kind of inclusive culture for the community to come forward and kind of connect to taking ownership and really feeling like they, you know, it's their idea, which it was completely. All we're doing is mediating, facilitating that the groups of people and the community to lead to this sort of, you know, to lead to this point. So again, when we identified external funding through Transport for Greater Manchester and through a local partner who is made up of solely community residents, this is where, you know, I think it connects very well to like working towards this sort of, you know, inclusive culture and environment around, you know, working towards physical activity as well. So it was a really interesting process to go through, and I think it really highlighted that like it is more than achievable. And those maps were actually put up in November 2021. Lots of, I would say, negativity and concern around like what might happen to them and things like that. But one very minute kind of positive around it is that they've not been touched, you know, and this we still do work around them today. It connects into the other work streams that you've seen there, and this will continue to support community-led initiatives moving forward. So, you know, it's very much like it just flows through that there is the community engagement that took place, and that there's people who were part of this process. It highlights all local assets. It highlights all local assets on the historical map. There is a real kind of like sense of belonging from local people that led to this point. We can just jump to the next slide, please. One of the kind of indicators around this, that I mean, very busy slide here. This is our what we call really a community hub as opposed to a leisure centre. It's actually called Bridlington Park Leisure Complex, but we very much refer to it as a community hub. This provision has led to such a wider scope of activity and engagement with local people, and it has resulted in, over the space of maybe 3 to 4 years, this real expansion of what is delivered. And again, that is local people coming through and overcoming barriers like walking through a gym sort of door and things like that. So again, I think we've worked hard to make sure that essentially, like it has to be an inclusive environment to create an inclusive culture, is probably the best way I can describe it. So we've worked hard on sort of all these areas, but we've actually worked hard on making sure that it's not only us that embed this into a way of working and an approach to supporting the community. So again, I could, you know, pick out so many different examples here of where it's been led through the community, and they're really, you know, important components of how they are delivered. If you just jump onto the next slide, please. So again, you can just read just some quotes from local people and partners there. It gives just a bit of an indication of just sort of what I've explained. It's kind of with this inclusive culture that we're working towards. You know, I don't want to say it's an inclusive culture per se, but I'd certainly want to say that kind of there's a lot of examples where we've demonstrated how in and outside of our hub, there is certainly different ways in which the community have impacted kind of decision making and done that real kind of like you know, co-design with other partners whenever there's been an opportunity for that to come up. So almost like when we look to explore new work streams, the kind of engagement has become almost like a little bit more straightforward with specific groups, because they are there now, and we've got that better connection long term that is almost cutting corners for engagement, you know, with a lot of these different local groups that have now formed or been enhanced by this sort of collective work piece. But again, all we've done there is hopefully facilitated that to happen, that the community are at the forefront of this sort of leadership on what we deliver. And then just on the next slide, you won't be able to read this, but we do have a couple of pages of a summary around like a bit of a case study around this particular work. You'll see things like a lot of the place partnership principles, you know, have really kind of flown through this. We were lucky to be part of that, I guess, implementation from the beginning. But this will give, again, a bit more of a snapshot around that kind of relationship, trust building, giving that confidence to local residents to kind of, you know, keep growing on what can take place, you know, in that community. And ideally, we can take these sort of blueprints and expand on them across to other areas, taking into consideration, you know, some of the factors I've talked about. So yeah, I'll just pass you back to Russ to kind of finish up on the last couple of slides.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, so in terms of why we don't think we're football, we're not whether we think or not. We're being told we're not by our communities, which is the, you know, how it should be, but we're aware of it anyway. So we don't think we're fully embedded across our wider system and wider borough yet, because although this has made some fantastic progress through the work that Ross and others have done in Brinnington, we're not yet seeing this consistently across all neighbourhoods in Stockport. We do see it in pockets in different neighbourhoods, and we are starting to expand this work into other neighbourhoods. So taking what we've learnt from the work in Brinnington, in terms of a framework, it won't happen exactly the same in all the other 6 neighbourhoods we're going to target, because obviously every neighbourhood is different. But as a framework, we're going to take that framework in the way of working into those other neighbourhoods. And part of our next stage of learning is, how does that framework transition between different neighbourhoods? What can be seen as a common factor? What other factors are a bit more specific to different neighbourhoods? So that's one thing we're working on yet, to further embed this across the borough as a whole. In terms of sustainability, we're finding that comes through effective distributed leadership and community ownership. So at all levels across not just community leaders, but down to individuals within communities within a neighbourhood. So the sustainability is moving from that individual relationships transitioning into community and organisational policy and practice in terms of the way of working and thinking, through primarily emphasising and facilitating and championing distributed leadership. For some organisations, particularly bigger public sector organisations, distributed leadership is more of a challenge. They tend to be more hierarchical. So that's one of our key focuses across the borough in terms of sustainability, that way of thinking across communities, but also across organisations in terms of policy and practice. Next slide, please, Simon. And in terms of what next then, how do we do that? So I've kind of talked about how we start to scale this across the borough. But what we don't want to do is do this work in isolation. We want to align this and embed this in other strategic work that's going on across Stockport. And one of the biggest pieces of community work that's going on across Stockport and across GM is the Live Well work. So a new Live Well model, which is very much around identifying and providing early help and support to make it easier for local communities to help themselves, their families, and those that they care for within their neighbourhood. So Stockport, through the Live Well model, is divided up into a footprint of 7 neighbourhoods. We predominantly have worked in one of those neighbourhoods through Brinnington, although it didn't cover the whole of the neighbourhood. So we need to look at how we grow this work across the wider neighbourhood, but then start to embed this through that framework transition into those other 6 neighbourhoods, but make sure it's aligned to the other strategic work that's going on in Stockport. Otherwise, it's likely to become, in fact, I'm fairly confident it would become siloed and wouldn't be seen as part of that wider work. And then through that, use physical activity, the example of how you do this within Live Well and other borough-wide community-based work. So we can show through the work that Ross has done in Brinnington how you do this with concrete examples that we can share across education, employment and health, and show to them not just how we're addressing inequalities in physical activity, but how you use this way of working to address inequalities through physical activity in those other areas of education, employment and health and so on. And therefore, physical activity being seen by both communities and the system, the wider system, as the norm, and how people not only become active and do physical activity, and Ross has heard me say this a lot, but we need to embed that thinking around, you don't need to be physically active by just going out and doing a bike ride or going to a gym or going to join a sports club. That's great. For me, that's doing physical activity. What we want, the starting point of that, is for our communities to be active throughout the day in everything they do in a more active, less sedentary way. So being active leading into doing the activity is very much around our hypothesis and way of thinking. And then how you use that to make sure that whilst you're doing that this is inclusive for everybody. And the communities are the best source of information about how we make this accessible in their locality, in their place, for every resident within that neighbourhood and the borough more widely. So they're some of our key challenges moving forward. I think that's it from us, Simon, unless Ross, you want to add anything else?
No, I think all good, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Russ and Ross. That was great, really interesting. I think Louis is going to just chair the questions session that we're having now. Over to you, Louis.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Russ and Ross, for talking us through your slides there. Really insightful. And we just want to open the floor now. I think we've got roughly 10 minutes for any questions. So I'm more than happy to read out any questions if you want to pop them in the chat. But please feel free to pop your hand up or just come onto the microphone and take advantage of Russ and Ross while they're here. Emily, thank you. Come on in. You're still on mute, I'm afraid. I don't know if you know. Is it not working? Yeah, feel free to type, but you might need to leave and then rejoin to get the mic privileges back. Microsoft Teams for you. I hope she does come back. If you've got any questions or thoughts, please feel free to pop them in the chat as well. Go on, Simon.
Yeah, I thought maybe it'll start get the ball rolling, but just something quite interesting that occurred to me during that presentation, Ross, was just that you mentioned the big local working in Finniton. I'm just interested because I don't know an awful lot about it. I'm aware of it, but I know they talk a lot about community empowerment and so on as well. Do you think there's a kind of a synergy there in terms of your work combining, because you're both sort of looking to try and, you know, encourage that leadership from within the community and empower communities, you know, to use that language? I think there's a bit of a connection there. How was it?
Do you want me to answer? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So yeah, real kind of big synergies there. Their kind of delivery was, I mean, I think they'd maybe been 3 years in when we began on the work, so they were quite a key partner with this to, you know, facilitate those forums and amplify a bit of the message. And I think they quickly understood that, like, our focus, you know, at the start wasn't specifically around physical activity. It was more embedding kind of community engagement and starting there, you know, at that point. And because they were made up of, I think there were around 20 local residents, you know, that, I mean, I would certainly say they're in a different place to the rest of the community because they've made that commitment, you know, to be part of that partnership. But also, you know, it was they could kind of be a bit of a conduit towards the community as well with the connections that they had. So that happened quite sort of regularly. It's not to say that that is needed there, but that certainly, you know, was a piece of kind of that jigsaw that supported, you know, this work to kind of get to that point as well. So yeah, you know, I like I said, I don't want to sort of focus on them, but actually they were just quite a unique organization in that area because of what they were made up of and what their structure was. So it was, you know, it was good that they understood that community voice and influence is that sort of like indicator that, you know, they can influence partnership decision making and some of those and the sharing of resource as well.
Right.
Just quickly to add on to that, Simon, I think it's important that as part of that initial engagement, you engage with those trusted groups and trusted individuals in those communities already, because they're the kind of the way into talking to others, and that traditional, you know, from an organisational point of view, particularly me coming from a council, you know, that term I don't like around hard to reach. Well, then are they hard to reach, or it's just they don't want to engage with the council or health or education? They're there, and these trusted groups and individuals within those communities already have that established relationship with many of those, you know, to use the jargon again, hard to reach groups and individuals.
I think in a lot of places I've talked about that sort of, you know, that initial mistrust of people like the local authority and some of these communities that have been through various regeneration initiatives, which, you know, have not made a lasting or big impact, you know, and so people get a bit cynical, don't they? So it's quite a challenge.
Thanks all.
I
Emma,
think we
did
have another question actually from Sarah, just in the chat, asking about what timescales have you been working to and how much resource has gone into this work?
I think in terms of timescales, that's the beauty of the place partner work, isn't it? It's not KPI driven. So in terms of the pace of the work has been led by communities. It's been led by Bridlington residents themselves. We've gone at their pace, and that's the beauty of this particular piece of work, as opposed to your traditional funding. In terms of the amount of money that's gone into Bridlington itself, that's not such a great amount of money. What we've focused on is investing in capacity rather than investing in things and programs, and we have put a little bit of money into some kind of capital, minimal, but also some equipment and so on. But the vast majority has been invested into capacity to facilitate, is probably the best way I could say it, because that becomes more sustainable than investing in stuff, to put it, not, you know, for want of a better word. Don't know whether you want to add anything, Ross.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I made a real effort to not talk about any timescales with the community, because I think, you know, and I've done it for sort of a long time previous to starting that work. You put the timescale on it, it already has a little bit of a breakdown in the relationship, knowing that they think that there's only a certain amount of time that you're going to be working in that area. It was really important to not talk about timescales and not talk about end dates, because what we're trying to do is embed this as part of our working, no matter if it's people through our hub, if it's myself or my colleagues in my team. It was just important that we embed this, you know, fully. The capacity side as well, we showed a commitment to doing that. But the other thing we didn't talk about as well was funding initially, until there was a point where we would need to explore. So like with the Bridlington maps, we didn't talk about how much it would cost and things like that. We kind of just got to that point, and we sort of a bit more behind the scenes actually facilitated that to happen. So we didn't access any kind of operational fund that we had through place partnerships, but we explored kind of external funding, which I think needs to be a component of this work as well. Is just expecting that, you know, when you get to that point when you feel like you need the resource to implement a community idea, there's then going to be options and opportunities to access that as well. So again, really, those two key points there around not talking about timescales and essentially not talking about resource, like you're just building up trust then from the get-go and maintaining that.
Thanks both. Emma, you've got your hand up.
That's a mistake. I don't know why that's happened. Sorry.
Okay, I thought you solved the mic issue. Not a problem. Emily, so you've made it back. Can you get on the microphone now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Cool. That was a really interesting session. I'm amazed by all the stuff that you guys are doing, and it's given me so much food for thought. Like, it's incredible. Two kind of questions from me. So people have spoken about it, and sorry if I miss any of the questions, but about this kind of like the cynicism and the lack of trust going into places where people have gone and delivered XYZ kind of over a time period. Like, how at the moment we've just started in one of our places, and we're obviously really trying to understand it in the community. And I'm wondering if there are any. Did you ever come up against big challenges with people who really kind of fought back and said, actually, we don't want this, we don't need you in place, we don't trust you? Did you have any of that to kind of, so I can understand and mitigate for future conversations? Yeah, that's my first one.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think we more, I particularly could think straight away of just people who were, I think you kind of have to like ride that kind of wave initially, where there's the sort of cynicism around it. They kind of, they've not had, you know, obviously, I think a lot of some of the people I'm thinking of in that community have experience where like nothing has been done. You know, it's that kind of like question and mentality. So you kind of have to, I think, you know, if you're coming forward generally, like if you're coming forward as a nice person who listens to them and actively listens to them and takes on board what they're saying, and, you know, not really necessarily have any like promises, you know, because it could be sort of false promises, but I think it's just a case of listening. I mean, I'll give one quick example. Like I sat in a meeting with, it was some parents who had SEND children, a particular focus on that. For about an hour, they absolutely rinsed me is probably the way I could describe that as life leisure, and a lack of provision. It went off on tangents around kind of like, you know, wider, you know, support issues and things like that. But it just needed to happen. And I think if you're open to taking that criticism and just sort of taking that on board and kind of nodding, but then you're seen to support maybe some quick wins with them, to support some of the ideas that they may have, to be realistic with them, you can get really far with them quite quickly. And that's certainly happened with those group of parents. You know, they use our hub. They have a small group that use it weekly. There's little things with that, and that can look very different. But you kind of just got to ride that like criticism sort of wave. You know, when that does happen, because I'm sure it will, and things. But it's a bit of a fresh start to it as well. So like it's yeah, again, there's maybe sort of other points to talk about that, but that it happened to me, so you won't be the only one to for that to happen. But yeah.
Cool. And with that as well, did you have to explain place to people and this, do you know what I mean? The theory of place and what that means? Because we have gone through a restructure recently and we've moved from delivery into this more strategic place view. And it's getting people who we're working with, different deliverers and things, to understand what place really means. How did that process go for you?
With the community or with professionals or both?
Both, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, with the community, like the funny thing for Bridlington is like it's actually quite a bit of an isolated sort of town, so that already gives the impression that like you know, they want to support sort of their community and things like that. So the talk around place and things didn't really matter. That language didn't really matter. Like we didn't really actually bring that. You know, we just focused on Bridlington itself. And then from the partners side, I mean, that's where I guess the forum was that kind of you know, place to pardon that, but was that place for people to kind of have these conversations, you know, and understand that like this work is solely going to focus, you know, on Bridlington initially. Let's explore the assets that we've already got here. Let's explore what we can. I mean, I didn't really focus on our leisure complex or our hub. I didn't really focus on that as well. Much more of that initially was just out in the community and kind of, you know, the building of those relationships. So it didn't really resonate. That language side didn't really resonate. We just tried to keep it quite simple and straightforward, I would probably say.
Nice.
So I hope that's kind of answered that question.
No, definitely. And sorry, I did have one other question, if that's okay. It's just around this evaluation and learning. As we're going into our place work now in Western, I'm trying to put together kind of like different touch points as we move forward. What for you were like the best like quant and qual kind of touch points as you've gone along to help you really measure that impact?
So yeah, Well, I think what you should accept, for sure, I'm sure you do, is that there'll probably be multiple tools that you could use. From the very start, it was the conversational side, so like a bit of a transcript, a bit of an analysis after it of what you felt like. Especially, I'd stress like the common themes were. I mean, that led to the support we had from the evaluation partner for Greater Manchester, which is Substance and Sheffield Hallam. They had these tools around these sense making sessions where it's more like an interview to explain that. We had like a bit of a stakeholder survey as well after some time with that. We had something that could explain a bit of the how and the why, which is called like a counts and measures tool. So we steered away from kind of like the stats, transactional sort of quantitative side, and we're more focused on that quality. So the more that you can do to I guess the information you have in your head to put down on paper, there'll be ways to translate that to then adhere to kind of some of the tools that I'm sure will be available to you to kind of explain a bit of the method and potential sort of impact. And I was just very visual, a lot of things in the forum. So it was important to kind of like bring that to the table. So you could translate that to evaluation partners and stakeholders, but more importantly, translate that to the community to give them progressions and updates of what you do. That is really key, I found. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cheers.
Just to add to that, in terms of from an organisational winning hearts and minds in organisations, the evaluation has been a key element of our work in terms of being able to demonstrate impact. Because when you're talking to big organisations, institutions, particularly if you're talking to health, local authorities, and so on, housing providers, it's the so what, isn't it? So this is how we've worked and what we've done in Bridlington. So what difference has it made? And the evaluation, and for me, particularly the video case studies, listening to residents, listening to communities of what difference it's making to them and has made to them, has been really useful for me to sort of win those hearts and minds across health, education, local authority. And I'm not a fan of banging my head against a brick wall. So where organisations were particularly resistant at first, we've moved on. We worked with those organisations who got it or were willing to work with us, and then using that evaluation, that helped me, because what you soon find is some of those organisations think, oh, hang on, this is starting to make a difference and we're a bit behind the curve here, we need to get involved. They come back to you, some of them, at a later time. So I wouldn't encourage banging your head against a brick wall. It hurts. But definitely start small, go for the quick wins, but build the evaluation around it, and the qualitative stuff has been really useful.
Amazing. I really appreciate those questions and the responses too. I think hopefully that's really been beneficial for those of us that are listening too. There was an ask if you could share the case study from a couple people in the chat, which I imagine would be echoed by pretty much everyone. So whether that's in the chat or something to be sent out or whatever, the chat might be best for people at the minute. But we'll wrap up the questions and reflections for now, and we're going to head into we'll take about 5 minutes just to have a little break, and in the spirit of physical activity and being active and moving more, just encourage you to do something that's not sat down if possible, or not sat still as a minimum. So grab a brew or do some lunges towards the kettle, whatever works for you, and we'll come back for about 10 past, please, and we'll move on to the next part. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Louis, and hi, everybody. Are we all back now? Just straighten this up a bit. Just want to talk through a little bit about then that sort of further work that we've done to try and sort of build on that learning, such as what Stockport have been sharing with us, and how that relates to the configurational analysis that we did. So we had these sense-making workshops, and this is the format that we shared there. for the decision tree. So it's basically telling us very similar information. We actually reduced this one down just to show the sort of top 2 conditions, so to speak, which was the community leadership and the community supporting community-led initiatives. And what that's showing is that there's a fairly strong prediction of community leadership and influence on its own, but it's much stronger when it's combined with a lot of community-led initiatives. So if we really want to change that, those cultures within the communities, we need both. And as Russ and Ross were saying, we need other things as well, which we talked about last week, which support community-led initiatives. So the thing that the simplified diagram doesn't really draw out, but this one really shows strongly, is that where you don't have that community-led leadership and influence, you almost always fail to get the inclusive communities as well. So there's a real suggestion that this is really important, that this is as a condition for developing those sort of community-led initiatives. So that's where we want to sort of draw out, what is it about this? Why is it making a difference? What's it telling us? And that's what we're going to sort of delve into a little bit. Before we get into the sort of the detail of that analysis, just to say the feedback from the sense-making workshops that were held. We did 6 workshops around the country, looking at different conditions and different workshops. There was some overlaps from different ones. And there was a sense that this model really did resonate with people's experiences. It sort of made sense to the way of thinking and so on. And, that sort of sense that authentic community-led action can actually sort of bring changes in the culture amongst those who tend to be less active. But alongside that, you need to make sure that those community voices are really sort of heard and having that, so it's not the agencies setting the priority, it's that genuine starting with where the community wants to go, which I think came out very strongly in what Ross was just talking about, actually. So communities determining and responding to their own needs and their goals. So we're going to go into some examples, which Harriet's going to take us through now, I think, of what we found when we went through the detail of those evaluation and learning reports, what that told us about this.
Thanks, Simon. So we've got a couple of examples from our data of where inclusive cultures for physical activity we're actually at the establishing stage. And I think, as Simon mentioned earlier, we don't have any examples where this condition is fully embedded, but these cases show really strong signs that they're heading in this direction. So in this first instance here in Calderdale, community representatives with strong local networks were appointed to the borough's physical activity strategy group, and they began to sit on strategic panels and were able to bring their kind of lived experiences as carers, shift workers and members of faith communities. And from this position as well, they were able to help shape investment decisions, so they were better reflecting the needs of the community. What's really important here is that it's not just community voices being kind of at the table, but these voices were genuinely heard, and this was due to kind of, and this, what this meant is that it helped build a lot of confidence within the community organisations and amongst system leaders that shared decision making can lead to more appropriate community-led action. And that really, really matters because it shifts the relationships and the power balance in the system. And obviously we can start to move away from, the short-term project funding that can really leave the voluntary or community organisations dependent on, and it can leave them really precarious. And it can help us move more towards approaches that actually share that power balance a little bit better and create more equal partnerships. So in Calderdale, there's evidence of them. There is evidence that they're moving in that right direction, and it's sort of establishing. And to move to reach that embedded stage, the influence we have seen here would need to connect a little bit more strongly, maybe with the community-led initiatives, So enabling sustainable changes in people's feelings, their beliefs and behaviours. And that means local people being supported to actually just drive their own change and have that confidence to act, and like having access to the resources they need to be able to make that happen. So that's how we would see them moving on. I think Louis is going to take us through a second example on the next slide, and then we're going to pause for an opportunity to.
Thanks, Simon. So here we've got a place example that's just been anonymized from the data. So community leaders shaped spaces, funding, networks, and policy to work to embed culturally inclusive physical activity across the place. So a couple of these examples see where community representatives were involved in influencing the space and facility design for their needs, things that would help them to be more active. So within this place, things around female-only spaces, having the ability for childcare was really important so that they could be active but not necessarily worry about what having to look after their children or for their children to be kept occupied. But also within the actual redevelopment plan, so within green spaces and facility design, that it's not just a case of we built something, what can we do within that space, but actually having those conversations beforehand, and having that community voice, helping to influence that. Local leaders shaping the funding priorities. Now, this was a really key one, from understanding that just funding organisations or small projects, 12-week interventions, it wasn't having the impact that was wanted. And Russ and Ross have talked about it before, about not just looking at the numbers or the stats behind things, but around like the how and why things can be different, and how change can happen. So the funding was changed to support organisations to come along the journey, so that there was less pressure on delivery and you need to hit certain targets. And it was more about, here's the funding, we're going to support you. You can use some funding for core costs, for things that help you exist as a business, as an organisation, with the long-term aim of upskilling them and supporting them towards a culturally inclusive place. And just the last one is around local organisations advocated for in the borough policy forums. So this was quite an important one in terms of influencing the planning, the documents, things that are non-traditional around physical activity, and that includes organisations, individuals, to bring that to the fore. That it's about being active, moving more, being physically active, not traditional sport or activity, and it really emphasising that across the place, and those decision makers that influence what things are built, how things are designed, and along those lines. And then I think it's back to you, Simon.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, sorry, my internet's been going a bit slow, so I hope I don't drop out. Just wanted to go back to, given the holiday season, going back to a sort of a beach analogy, really. Some of you may have heard us talk a little bit before about building sandcastles, and the attraction of building sandcastles is that you can do it quite quickly. You create something that can be lovely, and it's very tangible, measurable. You know, you can really see that you've made a difference, but it doesn't actually last, obviously, when the tide turns. So what we suggested is that maybe we need to be moving, what this is telling us is maybe we need to be moving from thinking about sandcastles to thinking about sand dunes. Sand dunes are part of the natural environment, and given the right conditions, they can thrive, and as such, they can actually, you know, create or sustain a whole ecosystem, which is sustainable, continues into the long term, and can adapt to change that takes place. So maybe, and it's very much sort of emerging naturally, I guess, from the place and the existing resources that are there. So So the reason why we're talking about sandcastles and sand dunes is because sometimes you may have a lot of community-led initiatives, but it could be very much short-term funding. We're giving lots of money to community groups. They're doing something great. It does make a difference for people while they're doing it, not knocking that, but in the long run, it doesn't last because the funding doesn't last. Whereas the sand dunes is more about kind of equivalent to investing in those communities, trying to build their confidence, enabling them to actually sort of develop and grow and thrive as a community by creating the right conditions rather than trying to do things for them or to them. So it's very much thinking about how we kind of enable that to happen. So it's it's where those community assets are sort of really rooted in people's lives. They are kind of more sustainable and more likely to make that difference because people relate to them. Russ and Ross talked earlier about that trust in the communities and working with those people who have already got those roots, you might say, in the community and building that up. So it's just sort of possibly a useful analogy or possibly a reminder that you'd rather be on a beach somewhere. Just to kind of sum up then, so what's coming out of our analysis of this and looking at those sort of detailed descriptions and evaluation learning reports and so on, it's quite tentative, because we haven't seen anywhere that's really cracked this yet. So we can't say if you do this, then you're going to get that. Unfortunately, as we know, it's not that easy. But we already know, as talked about last week, that supported community-led initiatives tend to be happening in places where community perspectives are really valued, and agencies are working with those voluntary community partners to sort of build that capacity. And those can bring those short-term benefits, but in order for that to be sustainable, we need that shift in the cultures around physical activity in the community. So thinking about what might enable that. And it seems what the data seems to be saying to us is, that where we've got that community leadership, that's telling us that communities are more equal partners. We've got that voice in decision making, then perhaps we're more likely to see those changes in cultures within the place rather than just projects. And it's possible that this could be down to those changing relationships in which agencies really sort of value and invest in that community-led action, but also are kind of sharing that power and resources, enabling them to act for themselves. So people within that community are sort of growing in confidence as well, and believing that they can make a difference. So it can work on a number of dimensions. There's kind of, it's building that trust, it's building that confidence as well. And how we do that depends not just on what we traditionally call capacity building, but also giving that voice to the community within the partnership working and so on. So what we're going to do now is move into some breakout discussions. I think Harriet's going to take us through that.
Thanks, Simon. Sorry, my computer's also being a little bit slow. So we're going to just head into breakout rooms. Emma's going to put everyone into breakout rooms for 20 minutes. And Emma, hopefully you can post also these questions. Yeah, thank you, into the chat. And we'll be able to send those questions out into the breakout rooms. But just want you to start to have a little bit of a think about this together in your groups. And don't worry if you don't manage to get through everything, but just good to have that kind of open discussion and hear from places all around the country. And I'd say, the main thing here is don't worry about how far along you are on the journey. It's just great to hear from everyone, wherever you're at and whatever you're up to. And yeah, just to kind of share your opinions a little bit. And really, I think, hopefully you've been kind of it's been a lot of active listening in the last sort of 15-20 minutes. And so you can really take that now and move it forwards with thinking about your own experiences, thinking about why might community leadership be important to the development of those inclusive cultures, you know, how and why. That's the way we like to think, that explanatory thinking. How and why might supported community-led initiatives be important for enabling the inclusive cultures, and whether those any insights of people with lived experiences of inequalities have shaped your work in your place. As Emma has just reminded you in the chat, please unmute before going to the breakouts, and then hopefully you won't have any issues. If you do have issues, try leaving and returning. And if you come back to the main room, we can hopefully sort of redirect you. Just gives anyone a chance if they want to share back. Yeah, Susie.
Hi, yeah, I don't mind sharing. We were just talking about community. I think it's really interesting. How do people identify that they're part of a community? So it's a step back from everything we've been talking about today. We might identify, as we have done within our active partnership, through all of the massive data and our local insight, we identify an MSOA area that is one of our priority areas for place focus. But those people who live within that area, do they even think of it as a community? What is community to them? Do some of them, and others who were in my breakout group were talking about a particular ward where they'd actually had, you know, they've got the insight that actually they identify as two communities. But I just think it's that point about, before you'd even start thinking about any of the questions here is or anything we've really discussed, is that it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think people necessarily identify in today's world as, I am part of a community, or if you started to explore that, and how would you go about that, and where would you start, and all of that piece of work, even to get before you could get into any of this. So that was just something that I was thinking throughout the topics this morning, and we were having a bit of a conversation in our group about that.
So interesting. It reminds me of when I was working in Stockport. We did some work during the pandemic actually on this, and with mapped prior to that, a colleague had sort of done some work talking to communities and actually mapped out the sort of the places that people are kind of identified with. If you ask them, you know, what part of Stockport do you live in, they'll give it a name. And those completely unaligned with all our official boundaries, which were done around electoral wards or primary care areas and policing areas. It's always different agencies, which all were very much unaligned and in themselves. But really importantly, you know, we can sometimes assume that people are a community when they sort of they wouldn't see themselves that way at all. You know, there was some regeneration work in one area where, you know, it involved two areas which were often lumped together because they're both quite deprived and adjacent to each other. But the people who live there regard themselves as a completely separate community and say, oh no, you know, we're not going to go to any activities there. But yeah, the point really is really important one. I think, you know, this is sort of links back to that sort of being really listening and being led by the communities rather than our existing sort of organisational boundaries.
Yeah, Ross, please
Yeah,
jump in.
just to support that, and Simon will know this, Brinnington people do regard themselves as from Brinny. They do identify as a community, and that's part of our, when I mentioned the framework that we want to now take into other neighbourhoods, that's part of the test. Does this framework still work in what we regard as the, you know, the system, what the system regards as a neighbourhood or a community, where the community might not see themselves as one homogeneous community? Does this way of, well, the hypothesis is the way of working will still be relevant, but you might need to work with more sub-communities, for want of a better word, within that wider system neighbourhood. And the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is people don't just live, work and play in one community. They're all over, aren't they? So that's the other thing to take into account.
So yeah, and sometimes you have these rigid geographical boundaries, and so you know, this project was only for the benefit of people who live within certain postcodes. But you know, often there's people who feel part of that community, maybe grew up in that community, but have now moved away, but still have their family there, you know, and are you know, regularly sort of engaging in that community, but they could potentially be excluded. So again, it's sort of thinking about how people understand a defined community. It's not just a line on a map, is it? Dan, I think you wanted to come in.
I was just going to say, that notwithstanding that I completely agree with the, you know, the geographical aspect of where people live, work, etc., and how they relate to it and where they define their own boundaries, which will often be very different to, you know, how rules and political situations and councils look at it. I think the important thing about having a voice or voices, preferably from the community in them, is the fact that, you know, if you can give some agency to groups of people that have felt over time that they don't have it, then that's got to be the absolute biggest payback. So the, you know, the pilot in Hackney worked it probably in a similar way to you've just described about the Stockport place, where, you know, it was a political ward, 2 housing estates. They didn't interact with each other particularly. Even the park facilities in the middle of the 2 estates have been dramatically improved. They saw themselves as completely separate, but by the pilot, because it was one of the original pilots being there, there was such a long period. Trust was built. People started to realise that, you know, their voice would be heard. As I confessed in the breakout group, sometimes the system still pulled the shutters down on something that we would feed back that the community wanted. So it wasn't always hunky-dory, and we didn't get 100% of everything people asked for, but I think they started to feel more that if they talked, we were listening. So I think that's the key reason it's really important.
Thank you. Should we just have a quick input from Ross, then we will need to finish?
Just to finally say, communities doesn't just mean geographical community, does it? So think about communities as being groups that live across different geographical areas of your place. That's a community as well. So you might have communities where the particular interest groups or particular demographics, that they're a community, but they might not live in the same place. So that's just another element of our work that we're starting to think about as well.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that, isn't it? And even within a place, there can be a lot of different communities in terms of how people identify. We're going to wind up here, so we're quite keen that we do have a bit of time for people to share some feedback and reflections, anything that you'd like to share with other people, could be links to resources and so on. So we've got a Padlet set up, and Emma's going to share some the link to that. Just in terms of our next steps, you know, we're going to we have got one more of these learning seminars in early September. Not got the date in front of me. Has everyone got it?
I'll put it up.
Anyway, yeah, that was going to be sort of doing a bit of an overview of thinking about, okay, we've identified these different sorts of patterns. What are the common features of those? How do they relate to each other? If we actually sort of bring those all together, what's the sort of overarching sort of learning that we can take from that in terms of going forward? So that should be an interesting session as well. I hope you can join us for that. We're going to carry on doing our analysis as well, obviously, and as many of you will be aware, we've got a new round of the survey going out, the system maturity survey, we'll be going out early September for places that want to take part in the CCA work over the coming year, and hopefully that's going to be a useful tool for people to use and to learn on whether or not you're taking part in the actual the CCA work. And we have just updated the language a little bit in that one. New version is actually on the website now, and we're just in the process of updating the support and guidance. That'll be ready next week too. So watch this space for that.